नेवी बीच में आके कराची पोर्ट पे आग लगा दे, मजा आ जाएगा।
बड़ी खबर, भारत ने सीधे इस्लामाबाद पर काउंटर अटैक कर दिया है।
खबर, पाकिस्तान घुस गई भारतीय सेना।
आग लगा दो कराची में, फूंक डालो पूरे शहर।
यहाँ पर 17 आंखों की आवाज सुनाई दे रही है काफी।
फ्रेश पाक ड्रोन अटैक इन सांबा।
लाइट कम कर लीजिए, लाइट कम कर लीजिए।
सेट फायर टू द कराची पोर्ट।
एक फिदायीन अटैक की भी खबर आ रही है।
आसिफ मुनीर के खिलाफ पाक सेना में बगावत की।
आग लगा दो कराची में, फूंक डालो पूरे शहर।
They had polar opposite narratives, not just of the meaning of what was going on, but what was factually going on.
If you try to fact check something and that goes against your narrative, either you're going to shut down the media outlet, or you're going to arrest the journalist, or you're going to ban the outlet or something.
The encouragement I always try to provide to journalists is that it's actually not a journalist's job to provide military strategy.
Instead of focusing to the real people, they're just staying in the newsrooms in Islamabad, Lahore, or Delhi. And it's like, oh, my sources on the border told me that they saw an Indian pilot or Pakistani pilot, or like the plane or missile, or they heard a big loud noise that something.
The video game version of India and Pakistan ignores so much of what real people are going through in real time.
Pakistan literally had banned Twitter for like past almost 2 years, and then all of a sudden they give access.
Where are the terrorists who murdered the people at that were at the tourist site in Kashmir?
India, Narendra Modi, he went on a podcast for 3 hours.
Really?
That podcast was 3 hours. In Pakistan, it's called hybrid regime. Like, we have a so-called elected government, but in the back is the military. And they are controlling the media and the narrative, and they would kind of arrest you, kidnap you, kill you, or do things. Hello everyone, thank you for tuning in for another episode of Science Talk. Today we're not talking about science, environment, or climate, but we thought there's a different issue in hand and we should shed some light on it. And today I invited Dr. Anita Verma. She's an assistant professor in the School of Journalism and Media at UT Austin, that's University of Texas, Austin, where she mostly focuses on media ethics. She has been leading a project called Solidarity Journalism Initiative, and she has done that work at Stanford as well during her PhD. And that is also housed in the Center for Media Engagement, where she is working mostly as a publicly engaged scholar. She writes, kind of blogs and also other than typical journal articles, and she mostly focuses on the role of solidarity in journalism. And I thought there's no better person than her to talk about what is going on or has been going on for the last 3 weeks in Asia, or South Asia more specifically. Two nuclear armed nations are trying to win a war against each other, but mostly not only the war with ammunition and missiles, but also the war of words and narratives. And that it has been propagated not on social media, but also mainstream media. And we may have, our audience may have seen the viral clips from both countries, and even some English audience share that on TikTok and other platforms to see how they have 8 guests at the same time at 8 p.m., like kind of trying to punch each other on the screen, live TV. So thank you for your time, Dr. Anita, and welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So what do you make of that? What has been going on for the last 2-3 weeks, as we are both, from those countries residing in the US? What do you make of those events, first of all?
Yeah, I find it all to be encapsulated by confusion. So I grew up in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. My parents are from Bihar, and so I've had some understanding of Indian media since I was a child. My grandfather lived with us, and he would subscribe to Indian newspapers that could be delivered in Pittsburgh. But I distinctly recall that in those days, about 30 plus years ago, Indian media looked very different. And this time, actually, with social media and Instagram, I decided to do a little experiment, which was to follow some Pakistani media, English media, since I can't read other languages. And I was equally surprised that there was so much alarmism and just genuine intensity to make you fear, even if you're not in the region, to fear for your life, and all of the contradictions, right? So ostensibly, both Indian media and Pakistani media were covering the same issues, and yet they had polar opposite narratives, not just of the meaning of what was going on, but what was factually going on. Did people in Pakistan have any water? Did people in India have any capacity to step into the regular day-to-day activities on a weekday? These things are simply fundamental, and they were completely contradicted by each other. And then we also see all the comments and engagements riling up more and more. And then US media gets involved to start picking up what they believe to be going on.
Yeah.
And suddenly everyone is a foreign policy expert. So
Yeah.
I think the challenge of a lack of verification and a lack of clarity of what the situation is and was continued, and these challenges around spin were on display.
Yes. So yeah, absolutely. And it's like the challenge is maybe it's more of a global, not specific to the region, but it's maybe more prominent in the region that if you try to fact check something and that goes against your narrative, either you're going to shut down the media outlet, or you're going to arrest the journalist, or you're going to ban the outlet or something. You know, imposed some draconian laws back in the 1835, which British used to do in subcontinent, and they would bring that back and say like, yeah, that's nice, but we're not gonna let you on air any of the truth or facts. Keep those facts in your desktops. Do not let it spread to the world.
So this is really important. I think that I've learned so much this past year working with a PhD student named Rahuf Kaliarkar, who understands this history, right, of press freedom in India much more closely than I do, but he teaches me, which is that in India, at least, there's been this ebb and flow, this push and pull, where
Yes.
at some points there's tremendous press freedom commitments, at other points there's not. And the fact that the Indian Constitution doesn't specify a press clause, but encapsulates it under free speech, makes everything quite murky and contingent. And I do see we see this in coverage of Ukraine and Russia, the security concerns about having media, news media that are reporting things that could reveal locations, could reveal strategies. But the encouragement I always try to provide to journalists is that it's actually not a journalist's job to provide military strategy. So that's the good news. But a journalist's job is to talk to real people. That's what I appreciated so much about your last episode of Science Talk, which is thinking more carefully about the impact of all of this on actual people. And so access to real people in both India and Pakistan is always a possibility, right? To talk to true people on the ground that doesn't require knowing or having access to any military strategy.
No.
But is actually a better route to the truth of what is the meaning of what's happening and what is the significance of it. That should be news of what it means for real people.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think instead of focusing to the real people, they're just staying in the newsrooms in Islamabad, Lahore, or Delhi. And it's like, oh, my sources on the border told me that they saw an Indian pilot or Pakistani pilot, or like the plane or missile, or they heard a big, like kind of, loud noise that something hit somewhere. So those kind of speculations and your sources, nobody knows who's the source and how credible it is. There's no way to verify and things like that. And to just spreading that panic, sitting in those newsrooms where it's like comparatively, like relatively safe than the people who have been relocated or internally displaced due to the conflict who are residing on the borders, including one of my sisters. She lives near that, and she was internally displaced because of that. And they don't know that part. Like, people have animals, they have land, they have crops, they have all those things, but they're sitting in their newsrooms and thinking like, oh, my sources told me this is what happened.
Yeah, and I think that I'm so sorry, first of all, to hear that your sister was directly impacted. Just this week, I'm seeing some small glimmers of reporting that is focused on some people who were displaced, but it's quite minimal compared to the gigantic coverage of what noises were heard from where and by whom. I think too that one thing that really I kept thinking about when I watched your last episode of Science Talk was around this issue of food.
Mhm.
And we see in some of the English language press that's covering the food crisis in Pakistan
Yes.
and cost of rice.
Mhm.
But even that is sometimes skewed, and I really appreciated the numbers that you laid out, given that India may not make the news for the same reasons, but there are indeed people who are
Yeah,
hungry
absolutely,
in
absolutely.
India.
Yeah,
And yet they are nowhere to be found in this news coverage because
yeah,
the news coverage is entirely focused on this particular military confrontation or the potential for more. And we then would want to ask from an ethical perspective, why? Why is it that there's so much emphasis here and not on what is an ongoing struggle
Mhm.
and which sets the stage for these kinds of escalations and manifestations of desperation that don't happen through the military, right? What are the militaristic interests here, and why isn't the state or the nation focusing on these problems of fundamental issues like food? And I know that water is implicated in this, air quality. But this
Absolutely.
desire to talk about like the video game version of
Mhm.
India and Pakistan ignores so much of what real people are going through in
Yes.
real time. I think from an ethical perspective, we have to wonder, given the populations of countries, where are the people in news coverage? Where
Yeah.
are people like your sister in this coverage? I would imagine that she was not consulted, she was not interviewed, she was not reached out to. And that leads to an ethical problem because it means that what's passing for news is not accurate. It's not truthful when
Yeah.
we don't have the people impacted in it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like kind of also like that issue, the ethical dilemma goes into like what is journalism there and what is left in journalism. It used to be a good advocate, good profession. Like people still believe, and thank God they do to a certain extent, that the traditional media is still a good source to go instead of relying on TikTok or Facebook or X, since even they have lifted all the fact checking parameters. So like literally I was talking to a friend yesterday and he was telling me, he said like, you know what, I used to believe that like this traditional media is the source for me to go to check what's going on. And then I heard a news conference from Indian Punjab chief minister was saying that it used to be the media who tells people what is truth, what is not. And now, unfortunately, it's me as a state politician telling media what is true, what is not true. And
Yeah.
he's like, this is what we have come to the point that a state representative or a politician is telling media what is truth. Instead of the other way around, like media is telling what is factual, what is not factual.
Yeah, I think this is a fundamental tension, and we see it all over the world right now. It's just starting to happen in the US as
Yeah.
well. This question of who is a decider of truth and where will journalism stand in that. P. Sainath was at UT Austin a couple of years ago talking about, he leads PARI, People's Archive of Rural India, and he was talking about this issue of the dynamics between dominant or mainstream media and the Indian government. And we see this being repeated in so many countries where media can very easily become a stenographer, can become an agitator. And I think it loses sight of what the purpose of journalism, at least, is supposed to be, which is to provide a public service. One thing that Sainath has done, and his reporters, some of whom are very young and very brave, is that they physically go to the people. So when they were covering the farmers' protests, they would not take anyone's word for it from law enforcement or government or even spokespeople that were trying to speak on behalf of, but they wanted to speak directly to the farmers. And I think that given the economic situations in both India and Pakistan since COVID and also before, we can see how revealing that kind of news coverage might be if people are actually asked about the prospects of war. How quickly I think we can expect that people would say that's not in anyone's interest,
Yeah.
as opposed to this nationalist
Yeah.
me on TikTok and elsewhere.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And I think like all of a sudden, the war, the actual conflict, which was like it kind of pushed back like the issue of like, yes, like there were 26, 28 people died, and how they got killed, and get that inquiry, and like get that investigation and going, what happened, cooperate, and deal with that, instead of that going in a full-blown war, and then going to another layer, which is like, misinformation, disinformation, lies, and propaganda, and let it flow freely. Like Pakistan literally had banned Twitter for like past almost 2 years, and then all of a sudden they give access
Yeah.
to X. Like, why? And already, like, military, politicians, business people, but they were using X through VPN, but they didn't give access to the ordinary people. They feel that is a more bigger threat. And
Hmm.
it's kind of shameful, like a country's prime minister is tweeting from the same country where the same platform is banned,
Yeah.
but they don't see that as a shameful, that like, oh, it's a freedom. And then on the other side, if you see somebody's reporting this, like, yeah, but this freedom is not the freedom which we would like to see. My freedom is more important than yours.
Yeah, and I think the tensions there are so difficult. So I know in India, when they called them the WhatsApp lynchings, right, with all of this misinformation and disinformation, and where does it lead? I mean, the United States has its own history of lynching, so this is not unique to India,
Yeah.
but how fatal disinformation spreading uh, and riling people up can be for obviously like a very brutal outcome. I think that these challenges of social media have never been adequately addressed, neither by government nor by the people, nor by the tech companies, nor by regulators, because tech companies generally say, well, we can't control everything that's on our platform. We don't even know everything that's on our platform. But as you're saying, government's taking this kind of Machiavellian attitude to say, well, when we want potentially the crowds to be riled up, we want more people to
Yeah.
have this us versus them and this in-group versus out-group,
Mhm. Yeah.
activation, then we're going to deploy it. But
Yes.
otherwise, there will be no freedom to speak or to critique. Just now, I saw The Wire in India had posted a set of questions that they would like to pose to Prime Minister Narendra Modi. And one of the questions was, where are the terrorists who murdered the people
Yeah.
that were at the tourist site in Kashmir? And that question, as far as I can find, in the English language coverage at least, has not been answered. And so I think that there's so many unanswered questions,
Yeah.
but this
Absolutely.
desire to emphasize the sensational and mass violence and wartime patriotism dimension
Mhm.
starts to feel a little less like an accident and more like a strategy to avoid the ethical practice of accountability, which is what the
Yeah.
survivors have asked.
Absolutely, and I think one of the things which is very unique to this region is that our politicians love to go on international media, and
Yeah.
they would not face the local media,
Yeah.
because they know that the local media they are going to ask good, relevant questions compared to the international media who are not familiar with the ground realities. They're gonna ask big questions, and you can dodge easily. Because
Mhm.
when I saw Prime Minister India Narendra Modi, he went on a podcast for 3 hours.
Really?
That podcast was 3 hours with that Alex Friedman, the guy, I think that's his name, very popular podcaster, and he went on his show for 3 hours. That is recorded on YouTube. And
Mm.
imagine how long the conversation would be if they have to edit it and make it 3 hours.
Yeah.
But they would never do that with the local media, to sit down for even for 3 minutes, where they know they're gonna be asked questions and they cannot provide answers, because they know they have the information, and it would be difficult for them to refute, compared to when they come on international media and they ask questions and they can dodge the way they want.
Yeah, I thought it was so fascinating. And again, I'm constrained because I don't follow news coverage that's not in English generally very well. But I saw so many clips on Sky News of
Yes.
officials
Yes.
from Pakistan
Yeah.
going on. And what was fascinating to me as I saw more of them coming up, it was that the news anchors seem to want a very simple answer. And
Yes.
the answer, to put it bluntly, that they were looking for was for government officials to confirm that Pakistan was responsible and that Pakistan
Yeah.
maintains ties to terrorist groups. And officials were unwilling to
Yeah.
give such a soundbite, and their attempt to offer a more complicated history of
Yeah.
Pakistan, the news anchors would cut them off and say, "We don't have time for that. We're not going to go into all of that. We
Exactly,
don't want to
exactly.
talk about these things."
It's the same as Piers Morgan. Like, he invited two people from Pakistan, two people from India, and they were like kind of doing back and forth. And it's like, hang on there. I would say like he didn't let them finish to give them full perspective because again they want to sound biased. They know it's a hot issue in the West. People would like to know. So let's get two people, get them fight, talk to each other, talk over each other. Nobody understands what's going on and then present that, and then I will get millions of views.
Yeah.
I think they were using, even though they have no history, no knowledge, no nothing about the region, and maybe they've been last time in India or Pakistan like 20 years ago, and they never even follow anything. I mean, if you follow certain accounts or certain media groups, even in English, I mean, they do good, reporting on issues often, but sometimes it's difficult to see that. But I think it's easier for English media to get those sound bites from those politicians or podcasters or people who are there, relative compared to the local ones.
Yeah, absolutely. I know that Siddharth Varadarajan was also at UT giving a talk this spring, and he explained that there's no, if any news outlet gets an interview with government official in India, they will be handpicked. There won't be this
Yeah.
format of an open press conference for any kind of discussion. And of course, in media ethics, we're very concerned about accountability, right? Who has access and the ability and the power to ask questions and who will
Absolutely.
be answerable. But I also think that there's so many challenges too in both countries around this question of the struggles that people are facing
Yes.
on the ground and the lack of recourse that people have. There's, I think, a lot of loyalty, of course. People
Absolutely.
in India feel very strongly about their national identities.
Yeah.
But capitalizing on that, I think, becomes the problem with media narratives that can really stoke the flames for a lot of alarmism, which when I spoke to people I know in both Pakistan and India, frankly, I was terrified. I wondered, like, is this going to be the last time I can speak
Yeah.
to them if there is truly nuclear war? And then what happens to the rest of the world? Like, these are big questions. And their answers to me when I talked to my friends, it was, we're fine.
Yeah.
Don't worry, go to bed. And so I think that disconnect also needs
Yeah, absolutely. And they're just like, oh, like India, like a Republic TV from India. They were saying like, oh, I see like Indian army, Bharati Sena is entering in Pakistan, ground troops, like without any evidence, without anything. And Pakistani journalists, very responsible journalists, I literally admire their reporting and their careers. And they were saying like, you know what, the response we gave them is not enough.
Yeah.
We need to do, I mean, like literally on national TV, you are advocating for an active war or more wars because you know there are going to be casualties. You know the people are going to die. You know the inflation is going to go up. You know unemployment is going to go up. You know the military budgets are going to go up. You know the other budgets are going to cut from both sides, not from one side. And it's interesting that how these people think, even though I think most of them do have nationalities of other countries and properties in other countries, so they can flee and they know where they're gonna safe house is. But another interesting dimension, maybe people would find it insightful, is in India, it's they say it's largest democracy, but when it comes to press freedom or asking questions to the powerful, it's very problematic. In Pakistan, it's called hybrid regime. Like we have a so-called elected government, but in the back is the military, and they are controlling the media and the narrative, and they would kind of arrest you, kidnap you, kill you, or do things. And on the other hand, it's officially elected government. So in both countries, it's kind of people at the end are facing different kind of problems in freedom of expression. One from the officially elected government, and other one is a hybrid regime or the military behind it.
Yeah, I think that these constraints, are very real. And again, we start to feel them in America. If you
Yeah,
look at this coverage this year compared to past years, it's very different in terms of what journalists and news anchors and editors are willing to put out and the potential for repercussions. I think that the main question that I often come to is, given the history of India and Pakistan, which are both places where solidarity has been so central to their
yeah,
formation, to how they've developed and changed very rapidly, when and how will the people speak? And that may not be on X, that may not be on TikTok, but
yeah,
how will people show up together? And what kind of pressure could that create, right? So the pressure that was created by this atrocity of murdering innocent people on vacation has this kind of outcome.
mhm,
But when people come together and they make known what their needs are, what their values are, could this start to change? Because one thing that seems very clear is that there are government interests, but there's also, as you said, there's electoral power there. And as people make known what they want and
yeah.
don't want, would that potentially have an influence over, even on a global scale, how people view these actions? But I also think that there is a challenge that, again, we're starting to see in the United States, which is a question of what are the alternatives, right? When it becomes difficult to imagine alternatives, I think that's where ethics sometimes goes out the window for people because it's just this desperate mode of survival instinct.
Yeah.
But as we think about what a better alternative would be, of course, there is a world in which both India and Pakistan can both flourish. And I think
Yes, absolutely.
the hope
Yeah.
of local media to highlight.
Yes, absolutely. Because like on Science Talk, I do talk on climate, health, and science. And also like, we have literally a lot of issues, like more issues than you have hairs on your head. Like, and you can talk about them and you can like raise questions and you can talk about like why our universities are not doing better, why we do not have research budget, why our healthcare system is so broken, why don't we have better health insurance system, why like poverty is so much, why like more and more people or children out of school. The challenge is literacy rate is not high. The internet access is literally 30 to 45% of the population. Majority of the population doesn't even have the internet access in the first place. Uh, and then you think about these issues, but nobody literally, because I do a lot of research on the content analysis part of the region, and especially in South Asia, including Bangladesh. But the media doesn't care about that. All they care is mostly clickbaits, the political news. Even if something comes up, it's gonna be political, like it has to do something with the government or the powerful people in both countries, which is very unfortunate. And nobody talks because at the end, as I said in the previous podcast, is people are
Yeah.
losing it. It's not the country who's gonna lose or win or whatever, because these people are gonna be in power and they're gonna contest elections, they're gonna go to that. But at the end of the day, is the loser is an ordinary person who is living day-to-day life, and want to send their kids to the school, want
Yeah.
them to graduate and like have them some sort of science or health or better life, or stability, economic, financial, any sort of stability they want to see.
Absolutely. And I think that the two news outlets in India that still give me some hope, one of them, I really am so impressed with all that they do with, as far as I understand, they have very few resources to do it with. It's called Muknayak.
Mhm.
Uh, and it's an homage to the original Muknayak led by Ambedkar. And I think they just do such phenomenal reporting, especially my family's from Patna, and Patna is generally nowhere to be seen in national news, least of all English language news coverage of India. But they do such justice, I would say, to the reality of the struggles, not the jokes about,
Yeah.
types or anything like that, but the true struggles of children, of people who cannot get by. undercurrent conditions, and they do it by physically going.
Yeah.
And I think exactly what you said about, people sitting in the big city media houses and claiming to know from afar, that's really a problem from an ethical perspective,
Yeah.
because now we've got these secondhand, third-hand, fifth-hand
Yes.
accounts that very quickly just become completely disconnected from the truth of what's happening on the ground. But with Muknaik, my graduate student and I, we interviewed a bunch of their reporters, editors, contributors, and what they kept talking about was spending time with people, and that really led them to understand what people are going through. I think People's Archive of Rural India has a similar approach, and this is really the majority of India that they're representing, and yet they are such a minority of the media landscape. So I think the ethical question is to try to figure out how could that be reversed, where it would be a minority of coverage that does not represent the human experience in India, and have the majority actually do justice to it. I think in Pakistan, my understanding from some journalists is that there are lots of challenges around what news outlets are willing to publish. So any kind of perceived dissent you can write the story, but it is not likely to get published. And the ramifications for critique, make that even harder. And that's where we also start to see in other countries in the region where journalists will leave the country, but continue trying to report.
Yes.
In some cases, it's called exile journalism, and other cases, diaspora journalism or
journalism.
national. And I think there are capacities there. The challenge, again, though, if you're reporting on Pakistan not from within Pakistan, then how can you be sure of what's truly happening on the ground? So my main advice for any media maker is to talk to your sister, right? To really see from the people. And, it might be the idealist in me that would imagine that talking to real people impacted is not necessarily going against the state. On the contrary, it might be very much in the state's interests, because the state only exists for the people, to understand what has happened, and again, ideally, how to help.
Absolutely. So you do solidarity in journalism and media ethics. So when it comes to ethical reporting in war or conflicts, or like when a lot is on stake, and some people might say like, oh, it's a very idealistic view. You can imagine like, oh, you want to uphold ethics and you want to show solidarity, but it becomes very difficult because at the end of the day, these journalists have families and they have their livelihoods, and they're humans. So like how does that tension, do you think, can hinder or may contribute to have more ethical or solidarity in times like this?
So that's what's fascinating to me, that it's actually in times of war that's in many countries, journalism suddenly decides to be in solidarity. But they don't mean solidarity the way that I do. What they mean by solidarity is we're going to wave the flags, we're going to have the flag emoji, we're going to be anti the other side, and that's their version of solidarity. And for some reason, it ends up being this one case where it's okay not to be concerned about impartiality. It's okay not to be concerned about sticking to the facts. It's okay to not primarily be a journalist and to be, a proud national citizen of fill in the blank nation. And while I'm all in favor of journalists admitting that they are never truly objective, I think that the danger is that journalists become pawns for military schemes and for agendas that may not be aligned with the people's interests. And so I do see times of crisis and distressing events as opportunities for solidarity, but I always encourage, from an ethical standpoint, journalists have a responsibility to be in solidarity with the people, right? As a public service, not as a government service, right? The government has their own ability to get messages out. They can go on a podcast for 3 hours, fine. But journalism is often the last hope for reliable and truthful information. And so that's what I always come back to, that the very first principle of ethical journalism is truth. And so what is truly happening on the ground, what's happening on the ground right now, and I can say this with complete confidence, is not 90% of what we saw on social media.
No, not at all, because all of those things been debunked from independent fact-checking sources internationally, and unfortunately in both countries there are not many thriving fact-checking organizations which can survive in these clickbait or virality content, when people are just like, look, see, this is what I was saying. So they just wanted that instead of looking at the facts and those organizations, and then it has to come from independent sources, and then people start questioning, oh yeah, it's from coming from the US, it's coming from China, it's coming from France, it's coming from certain country, and they might not be they deciding by certain narratives. So they try to politicize or manipulate those even independent fact-checking organizations because it goes against your beliefs.
Absolutely. And I think when things go against your beliefs, we see that so much in the US and plenty of other countries, that there's this tendency to try to reject it or try to assume this must be a conspiracy rumor. It can't possibly be the case. But what I think about a lot is a person who was killed in between the Kashmir attack and this military confrontation. And he, I believe, was 36 years old, from Kerala, and had some mental disabilities, is how he was described. And he was beaten to his death for supposedly, and this has been debunked and verified and debunked again, so I wasn't there. I couldn't tell you if that was true or not, but for saying two words in support of Pakistan, and he was in India at the time. And I think that, the fear that Muslim people in India have had to live with, this is a story that, even if we say, the story of the day must be conflict between India and Pakistan, okay, let's define that in the terms that it needs to be defined in, which is that Indian Muslims live in fear when these kinds of issues erupt, and that's not adequately accounted for, right? Because then we get
absolutely. There was another viral clip, and there was a reporter asking a young boy, maybe like 10, 12 years old, and he said like, oh, do you say Pakistan Zindabad? He said yes. He said like, do you say India Zindabad? He said yes. He said like, are you not ashamed? He said like, no, I'm not. What is ashamed of? It's like, oh, you're like rooting for our enemy nation. It's like, who's the enemy? There are people there. There are Muslims there. There are Muslims here. There are Hindus there. There are Hindus here. So why are you? He's like, are you not ashamed? He's like, you're making a news out of Muslim and Hindu conflict. Are you not ashamed as a journalist? That clip gone viral a lot, and people from both sides were saying like, this is the true face. Like a 10 years or 13 years old can comprehend that like a news media want to put words in your mouth and get that, like kind of clickbait viral clip they want. And that guy was not giving him, he was talking like, both sides is the humans are gonna suffer and we're gonna die, and you're just making the news to make somebody happy in the government or somebody, but you're completely ignoring the fact. And that went viral, and people felt that. People said like, this is so relevant, this is what we been saying or like kind of want to say, but because media is not talking to ordinary people, so they cannot say those things.
Yeah, and that's exactly what I mean by solidarity, right? So solidarity defined as a commitment to everyone's basic dignity. And all of us have basic dignity, not because of where we were born or what our passport says or what the border becomes, but because we're humans. And, oftentimes people are very surprised at that. I would apply that globally. There is not a single country in the world where I would add an asterisk and say, except for, right? And I think that's the mindset that we need to get away from, to say, well, there are a few exceptions to this. We believe in humanity, but just not over there. Because at that point, the ethical defense falls apart. There's no justification for it. But I think that the fears and the concerns are obviously very, very palpable. But it comes back to such a central tension of what these countries will mean. Of course, the fight for independence was not easy. No. And then the question is, what comes after that, right? Yeah. What will India and Pakistan be known for if the legacy becomes a matter of, self-assured mutual annihilation? Then I don't think that's really the legacy that anyone fought for in that time. Those people are not here anymore. But I think there's that ethical obligation too, to show that this is more than, two formerly colonized groups that are now going to murder each other.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So, thank you so much. We have to leave it there. I think it was enlightening, fascinating conversation. I hope audience will find it helpful, or maybe we will become another talking point. Like, look at that! Like they're talking about like sitting in all over, the U.S. talking about. Indian-Pakistan war, but no, we are talking about journalism and ethics and solidarity in journalism and how journalism should be behaving in such scenarios. And they have a bigger role to play and they have a bigger responsibilities. They cannot just go by advocating for more wars between two nuclear armed nations. Then they know billions of people are going to suffer who they're already suffering for decades, and it's not going to be helpful. So however you feel about the issue is the more responsible, ethical, and solidarity journalism we need in the region in the future. So thank you so much again for your time, and thank you for watching the Science Talk. Thank you.